Hey everyone, welcome to Gorge Views. And now before I begin this inaugural episode of the show, I want to give you a brief overview of what Gorge Views is going to be about in the long run. First and foremost, our vision. We want to see Niagara Falls becoming known as a city of excellent views. And I'm not just talking about the waterfalls, but definitely the Niagara Gorge itself and even the upper river. But beyond those natural views, or literal views, the figurative views. All right, as a destination city, we should be kind of a trendsetter within the leisure, hospitality, recreational industries. And we have the capability to start doing that. Now, before I jump into that capability, I want to talk about our mission. All right. We want to maximize the Niagara Falls experience for both residents and our guests. All right, because we have plenty that's underutilized already. You keep hearing people talk about, oh, we need to build more things to do, more activities. But quite frankly, we have a lot of activity that no one's using, and we want to change that. So to accomplish our mission, we're going to, at least in this first series, utilize 3 strategies. One strategy is going to be promoting the digital and multimedia studio we have here in the NAC that I'm using for the show. And the other one's going to be educating the local population on the foundational documents. And I'll explain what I mean by foundational documents later in the show. The third thing we want to do is raise awareness of all the things we already have to do in our city today that we are underutilizing and under-promoting to our own guests. So in some ways, this show is going to be a bit of a variety show, but it's going to be a variety show with a serious purpose and some serious content. The plan for this first episode is going to be to introduce you, the local audience, to the studio here in the NAC, give you an overview of Niagara Gorge Access and why you should access it. Then we're briefly going to share an overview of what I refer to as the city's foundational documents, and we're going to spend a little time focusing in on our comprehensive plan. So let's just jump into the studio that I'm utilizing right now. This place is a gem, and let me give you some background on why I see it that way. A few weeks ago, I was on a podcast here in the studio, and I was blown away by its layout, its setup, its capabilities, and all the different nuances that lends itself to just tons of different uses. Prior to me retiring and coming back home 7 years ago, I was immersed in a media-reliant career. I would travel the world to foreign countries and utilize media to convey information to foreign audiences. And sometimes as a small team in a third world country, we were relying on local media vendors to get things done, and it wasn't a media-rich environment, and that really hampered our efforts to convey information to those audiences. Other times I was part of a national priority mission, and we had much more robust capability in a foreign country that we built ourselves. And then back home in the United States, I basically had everything that Disney and CNN had available to me. And was quite spoiled, but also quite distant from the audience that we wanted to speak to. What we have here, right here in the NAC, right here in Niagara Falls, is something in between that national priority that I had available to me overseas and what I had back home in the United States. So it's a lot of capability, and I just want to make you guys aware of that. Now, in order to maximize this capability, we need more human capital. So if you know someone or you yourself are interested in multimedia as a hobby or as a career, you really need to reach out and see if there's some volunteer opportunities that you fit into. Come visit the studio and see what they have. Get involved in helping to produce one of the podcasts that are currently being recording in the studio. If you're a small business, you can think about some of your own digital multimedia marketing efforts. You've probably explored what professionals have and found it cost prohibitive. You're probably going to find this studio can do more for you at a lower cost. So a lot of the options are endless. And moving forward, we basically need that human capital first. I don't want to belabor it. Future episodes, we're really going to highlight some of these capabilities for you. But right now I want to transition more into the Niagara Gorge and Niagara Gorge Access. There are 6 points of access to the Niagara Gorge. a lot of people, they might be aware of all 6, but they haven't really intellectualized it. I think it's important that you think distinctly about all 6 points of access and the unique perspectives each one of those offers you and our own visitors, and the amount of time it takes to really enjoy all 6. The first point of access is one everyone's pretty much familiar with, and that's the elevator goes down to the Maid of the Mist launching point. You think of that as the Maid of the Mist, but no, that's a point of Gorge Access. It gives you a unique perspective of the falls. You can go a little bit further south and get close to the American Falls there, and you're getting to see what I call the deceivingly calm beginning of the gorge. It's obviously deceivingly calm because a mile away at the rapids it gets crazy. That's the first point. The second point is also an elevator. That point is south of the Rainbow Bridge. Just north of the Rainbow Bridge is another elevator. It's really close to the Gorge Discovery Center, and it takes you down to the new maintenance docks for the Maid of the Mist. But a lot of people don't realize there's public access there too. You just walk in, hit the elevator, takes you down at the bottom. When you step out, it's obviously very welcoming and wants tourists to come down because there's plaques that give you some of the industrial history and letting you know that that was the original site of the first hydroelectric plant. And it's giving you the history of the collapse. And then as you look at those plaques, you can kind of look back up over your shoulder at the cliff wall, and you can see all the different artifacts of that old industrial history. Now there are some paths that start there and take you north and join up with what I like to consider the third point of access, which is the beginning of the trail on the cliff top that takes you on a slow descent down into the gorge over the course of about a mile, and ends basically underneath the Whirlpool Bridge. That trail has, at different points of elevation and different distances, lots of different views. When you get all the way to the end of it, you're practically under the Whirlpool Bridge and you're looking over a mile up the gorge and you're still seeing the waterfalls, and you're right there at the transition point from deceivingly calm to the beginning of the Class 6 rapids. Now, if at that point, you're basically at what I consider the third point of access, or the first stairwell. So the stairwell's there and it takes you back up to the top of the cliff, and at that point you're standing just across from the Underground Railroad Center and the new train station, right by the Next Center, right at the bridgehead for the Whirlpool Bridge. So you could always just park over there and start there and take the stairwell down for a quick trip near the rapids, or hike the gorge back up the other trail and come back around the new paths on the cliff top. So that stairwell's the fourth point of access. And then the fifth and sixth are also stairwells. The fifth one would be the north side of Whirlpool State Park. And the sixth one is the north portion of Devil's Hole State Park. When you go to Whirlpool State Park, obviously it's a really good view from the cliff top, particularly at that peak. And if you're not familiar with that stairwell that's in Whirlpool State Park, what you would do from overlooking the flat rocks is turn to the right and walk north, keeping the gorge on your left. And it's a bit of a distance from the optimal vantage point. You kind of go in the woods, and when you think you might have missed it, you're probably halfway to it. So just keep walking. As long as you're on the path that's close to the gorge, you will not miss that stairwell. Now that stairwell, what it really offers you is access to the flat rocks below. It's one thing to look at the rapids from the cliff top, yeah, and you see all the white caps, you're like, yeah, that looks like rapids. But they're Class 6 rapids. If you don't know it, there are no higher classification of rapids on Earth. I'm not saying those rapids are the craziest rapids on Earth. I'm just saying there aren't Class 7 or Class 8. Those are Class 6. That's the strongest rapids you can get. When you're on the flat rocks, close up to those, you're going to see how high those waves actually are. You're going to be hearing the thunderous sound of the rapids. It's almost like being below the falls themselves. And you really experience the power, and it's uniquely different than just observing them from the cliff top. You could also head north from that stairwell along the gorge and find yourself at the sixth point of access. That's at Devil's Hole. It's another stairwell. You can park at either park. You can use either stairwell to go one direction below the cliff and go back to where you parked above the cliff. And that's a nice one-day's excursion. So that's Niagara Gorge Access in a nutshell. And again, future episodes, we're going to delve into each point in more detail. All right, so now we're switching gears. Before I start talking about the foundational documents of Niagara Falls, though, I think it's important to discuss some planning principles and terminology, because at the end of the day, all of these documents are integral to planning and problem solving here in Niagara Falls. So there's thousands of planning modalities in the world, but all of them really revolve around four basic steps: identifying the problem, gathering information, developing a solution, and then implementing that. From a planning perspective, you're identifying your objective, gathering information, developing a plan, and implementing the plan. That's the very basics. Obviously, more complex problems and more complex plans for more complex organizations require a lot more attention to detail within those basic steps, so you have lots of sub-steps. Others would argue that there's also a fifth critical step, and that's monitoring and measuring your progress and adjusting the plan as necessary. Now, at the organizational level of planning, there are also three distinct levels of planning, and that's strategic, operational, and tactical. Any organization that isn't thinking distinctly about those three levels of planning is putting itself at a very competitive disadvantage. And I hope as we go through this, you'll start to understand why. So the strategic plan starts with a really clear, obtainable, but challenging vision. The meat of a strategic plan are actually the strategies. Those strategies are usually also the focus of your operational plans. And there's a lot of ways to go about developing your operational plans. They can be focused on a strategy, or they can be focused on several strategies over time. And you can have multiple operational plans within an organization that's doing some combination thereof. And I don't want to go off on tangents into the rabbit hole on planning. I just want everyone to understand these three layers of plans: strategic, operational, and tactical. It's also very, very important for an organization to be completely familiar with the strategic plan. The operational plans have to be nested with the strategic plan. That means, nested means being supporting and congruent with what you have in your strategic plan. The people in the organization have to be aware of what level they are planning and executing at, and how it's contributing to that ultimate vision in the strategic plan. So a lot of the words planning and strategy all over. Very, very important, though, to keep those three layers straight: strategic, operational, and tactical. Now, one of the more complex planning modalities I learned that does a better job of simplifying the complexity of the planning levels looks more like this. And it's vision, strategies, plans, and tactics, where your plans are your operational plans and your tactics are your tactical plans. A lot of my military career involved planning as a man focus, so this is kind of internalized for me. And it's kind of hard for people who aren't used to planning to keep this straight. So I'm going to take this slowly over the course of the series. So now that we have a common understanding of some basic planning principles and terminology, there's one more thing I think is important. We need to focus in on that rather critical and often overlooked step of gathering information. There's four categories of information that you should be gathering, and if you don't think of the information in the context of those four categories, oftentimes you fail to analyze it wrong. So I really want to focus on that for a second. Now, because the tactical level is much more obvious, I'm going to use the tactical level of the city's organization and draw examples from a tactical level plan. And keep in mind, this is hypothetical, so please don't start screaming at me in comments about, well, we actually had 10 trucks or we actually have 40-man crews. This is hypothetical. So let's take a look at this. There's facts, assumptions, constraints, and limitations. Facts are known statements or data concerning the situation. The things that really jump out that are more obvious, like sticking with DPW, for example, they have 4 dump trucks with X capacity and 10 workmen translating into 80 man hours. Just basic facts that you would need to know to do your road paving schedule. Your assumptions are suppositions about the current situation or future situation that are assumed to be true absent of facts. Now, assumptions are interesting. They actually really need to pass what's called the necessity and validity test. One common assumption at the beginning of the summer season for DPW would be the weather will be conducive to paving. It's a valid assumption because it is likely to be true. It's a necessary assumption because if the weather isn't going to be conducive to paving during that season, well, then you can't plan to pave during that season and you'll need to pick a different season. Now, it's an important assumption because obviously it will not always hold to be true. There are going to be days when the weather isn't conducive and you're going to need to adjust your plan. Now, at this level, the DPW guys, they anticipate this every year. They know it's going to draw out. And so they probably put some padding into their plan over time. Like if every day the weather were good and everything were working well, they could probably pave 300 miles of road. But they know there's going to be days that they're going to have to not pave because of a maintenance issue. There's going to be days that they're going to not be able to pave because of weather issues, and they pad that into their plan. Now let's talk about constraints. Constraints are things you cannot do because you lack the authority, or there's a law that prohibits it, or you were told by a higher authority, don't do X in these situations. Going with the DPW example, maybe the director is constrained from authorizing overtime. So he is constrained to 80 man-hours a day times just 5 days a week. Can't work on the weekends, can't authorize overtime. OSHA, for example, forces a lot of rest cycles for the workers that you can't violate. So a huge source of constraints there. Constraints shouldn't be confused with limitations. Limitations are tied to your capabilities. A lot of times, limitations are a combination of facts. A 10-man crew can pave 2 miles of road in 8 hours using 4 dump trucks that carry X tons of asphalt per trip, and the number of trips from the paving site to the asphalt plant is X number of miles. So you start to calculate out using those facts what you're limited to do each work segment. Limitations really start to demonstrate the analytical side of the gathering information step. Facts are often tied to resources and constraints to authorities. Both of these are possible to change. Once you start to see your limitations will prevent you from reaching a goal in the time allotted, one can go back and ask for more resources to overcome those limitations. Or they get to ask whoever is directing the activity for more time to do it due to limitations. But now you're really laying out the argument very clearly for them because you really organized your information well. Constraints, kind of the same thing. Constraints can be removed. You have to go and appeal to the authority that's behind the constraint and ask for it to be removed. Some authorities are just so high, like OSHA. OSHA's not changing their laws for you. So you're probably not going to overcome an OSHA constraint. But the overtime constraint, that is something that's been directed by, say, the, what's the position beneath the mayor? The city administrator. Thanks. See, that's background support there, guys. A lot going on in the studio you don't even know about. But yeah, so the city administrator might have placed that constraint, and so you just go and appeal to that authority to remove the constraint. Maybe it's a budgetary constraint, and it kind of flows back to something the council directed. So you go to the council and ask for that constraint to be removed. We've had a pretty good planning primer. Now let's direct our focus to those foundational documents. So what are the 4 foundational documents? Well, the city charter, the comprehensive plan, the zoning ordinance, and the budget. Basically, these are the 4 walls of our foundation that we're building everything on over time. Let's look at the city charter for a second. Now, this document did found the city. It's a lot more like the U.S. Constitution. It has changed a bit over the years. Now, it defines Niagara Falls both geographically and it defines our government structure. In many ways, it's the box that we have to think outside of. Before I go there, let me talk about boxes. Now, a lot of people say, you got to think outside the box. And it's absolutely true. If you really want to solve a problem, you have to think outside the box. If the answer to the problem were inside the box, it probably wouldn't be a problem, and you probably solve it like that if it is a problem. So you have to go outside your boxes, the constraints on your thinking, to find a solution. But what a lot of people also do is forget about the box, and they try to pull this big thing into their box, and they destroy their box in the process. So when I talk about the city charter, it does define the box. It literally defines the city geographically. Here's the borders of the city. And it tells us who has what authority in the city and what responsibilities. And these two concepts are important too. Authority is you are authorized, you can direct an activity. And responsibility is what everyone expects you to do. And these two things have to have a balance. If you have more responsibility and you have authority, you will always fail. 100% of the time, it's just a matter of time before you fail because you can't direct what needs to be done. So that basically means you have to have at least as much authority as you have responsibility, and it's usually more optimal to grant slightly more authority than responsibility. And that's definitely what you see in the government. We, the people, have delegated authority to our government to do things at the end of the day. And then we start to look at them like they have more authority. And that's only appearance because their authority has been formalized and you know the mayor has this authority, the chief of police has that authority. You, the citizen, what authority do you have left over? What document tells you? Not quite as clear. Again, kind of going on a rabbit hole, but it's important to understand the contextual side of this document, what it does for us. Our charter is also a source of most of the constraints if you're planning anything for the city. So anytime you're trying to solve a problem or develop a plan and for civic action and take that to the council or the mayor, you really should have been referring back to the city charter to understand how that will have to be worked through and who's going to have to make decisions on it. And you have a much better understanding of process, and you'll probably refine your plan a lot better and go to them with a better plan to begin with. So that's the city charter. The second most important foundational document is the comprehensive plan. We're going to spend a lot of time on that over the course of the series, but we're definitely going to dwell on it a little bit here too. All right. Your comprehensive plan, it is the city's strategic plan. And going back to planning principles, if everyone doesn't understand a strategic plan, doesn't understand where they fit into the planning hierarchy, am I doing an operational plan? How is my operational plan supporting the strategic plan? Things are going to get muddled. And more on the operation or the strategic plan later, but some people might debate me like, no, it's a comprehensive plan, it's not a strategic plan. No, it is the strategic plan. In fact, if you know a little bit of history about our comprehensive plan, 2004-ish, a company called Urban Strategies Incorporated was contracted to kind of look at the city and develop a strategic plan. And they published a document called the Niagara Falls Strategic Plan. And over the course of the next 5 years, from 2004 to 2009, a lot of people in the city looked that over in the previous administration. Different committees looked at it very closely. And then in 2009, they essentially took that document called the strategic plan, relabeled it the comprehensive plan, and formally accepted it as their governing policy going forward. Now, we can debate whether or not they've actually used that as policy, actually tracked it as policy, and actually followed the plan or not, but it is the strategic plan. And that really isn't up for debate. Now, the third foundational document that's essential is your zoning ordinance. Like the city charter, it is often a source of constraint, but in many ways, it's also essentially an operational plan meant to support the strategic plan. Many might dismiss this conclusion as my opinion, but that's why I find it essential for people to look over these documents themselves. The documents really tell you what they are, and failure to recognize them for what they are often means those things fail to do what they're intended to do. For example, the zoning ordinance states right up front what its 5 purposes are. The first, fourth, and fifth purpose in the zoning ordinance directly reference the intention of the zoning ordinance to support the comprehensive plan. As you really begin to understand the language and what the words mean in the second and third purpose, you will also start to see and understand how those also support the comprehensive plan. So it's a strategy-focused operational plan as opposed to a time-focused operational plan. So it's trying to take some of the strategies out of the comprehensive plan, focus on those, and implement them over time. If this document's not aligned with the comprehensive plan, though, and all the decisions that follow are going to create turbulence over time. And in future episodes, we'll kind of be looking at some of the ways that's already occurred since 2009. In many ways, I believe our zoning ordinance is actually divorced from our comprehensive plan. So we have seen a lot of turbulence, and if you don't recognize the disjunction, we're kind of fighting some of the wrong battles and getting further and further off track as we go further and further into time. Now, let's focus on the fourth foundational document, and that's the city budget. Now, this is also a source of facts in planning. It's a source of limitations in planning. Obviously, the numbers in the budget are facts. We have X amount of money to do X things with. This amount of revenues coming in. This has been allocated for that. Simple facts. But it also creates constraints. Once you allocate money, it kind of becomes a constraint. And it's also an operational plan. Unlike the zoning ordinance, which is focusing on strategies over time, your city budget is focused on accomplishing in time, right? It's an annual budget. So we got 1 year to use these resources, accomplish those things. If that's not congruent with your strategic plan, you're not accomplishing your strategic plan. You may be managing or administrating your city, but you're not moving it forward towards that vision you have in your strategic plan, right? Because the strategic plan starts with a good vision. If your annual operational plan, the budget, has no tie, no cognitive energy spent on connecting any piece of it to accomplishing anything in your strategic plan, it's a really crappy operational plan. And we've seen that over time. Let's go back to, say, the casino revenue, right? The intention was, and that was a good strategy, and it was happening about the same time we're developing a strategic plan. Let's take that money and let's reinvest it to fix infrastructural problems and create the capacity to move forward and accomplish goals that are strategic in the comprehensive plan. But as you start to draw that money out of that focus and place it into day-to-day administrative focus, you start focusing on like tactical level tasks, all right, and ignoring your strategic level tasks. And again, you might be handling city business and operations, but your foundation is also crumbling over time. And we're going to focus more in on that in the future too. But now I want to jump back and I want to focus a little bit more on our comprehensive plan as a singular document. Earlier I stated strategic plans start with a clear vision. So if our comprehensive plan is a good strategic plan, it obviously has a clear vision. So what is that clear vision? The first section of the document is entitled The Purpose of the Comprehensive Plan. And this is where any planner of merit would have clearly stated the vision. Now, the second paragraph says, the comprehensive plan establishes a clear vision and an action strategy. I would feel better about the plan, though, if it clearly stated up front, the vision is. Boom. Now, this could be a semantical critique and not a critical flaw. So, despite what I would do, let's investigate further if it's just semantics or if it's a critical flaw. So, the driving principles and strategic focus of this plan is quite clearly fixing the core city. And they define the core city as an area loosely bounded by Portage Road, Whirlpool Bridge, and the upper and lower Niagara rivers. Creates a bit of a box, basically. You draw a line from the Whirlpool Bridge up to Portage over to the upper river, and then the upper river and gorge are the other two sides of this four-sided area that they call the core city. Now, while that is obviously a very strategic focus, it's at a minimum a critical task to this plan. If you don't accomplish revitalizing that core, you won't accomplish anything else the plan wants to accomplish. It also could be a vision statement in and of itself. The plan also clearly states that its goal is to reposition Niagara Falls as a more economically and culturally diverse, attractive, and vibrant regional center, possessing a distinct role with both the Erie Niagara and binational regions. Now, this goal is visionary, but is it clear? I'll let you guys spend more time reading the document on your own between this and the next episode, and send me your comments. I am really curious, because I have struggled with this for years. What is the vision? If that's the vision, is it realistic? I mean, obviously, in my view, the goal of repositioning Niagara Falls is too far-reaching, particularly for the time period that the plan was being written, which was frankly 15 years ago, approved over 10 years ago. However, the comprehensive plan focus on strengthening the core city, to me, was clearly a broad strategic goal, a necessary condition to be set before you can actually start repositioning this entire city. But again, after years of thought, I'm undecided, and I'm stuck with the following questions. All right, is the vision statement likely something around, is the vision statement something like establishing Niagara Falls as an economically and culturally diverse, attractive, and vibrant regional center with a distinct role within both Erie, Niagara, and the bilateral regions? I mean, is that the vision? If it is, then is that an achievable generational goal? Something, and what I mean by achievable generation, I mean something that you can do within 10 and 20 years, realistically. It's been 15 years since the words were written. It's been over 10 years since we adopted this as a policy document. Are we within 5 to 10 years of repositioning the city, of achieving that? Or is that goal still too far out that it's having a demotivating effect on our population? And that's kind of the flaw of having a too far reaching of a vision statement. It can be very demotivating to the population. It also creates something that's more nebulous, there's no concrete aspect about it, and it messes up your priorities over time. It's easy to deprioritize important things that are taking you towards that because you put it so far out in the future, you don't believe you're ever going to get there. So given this year's budget, who cares? We'll kind of work on it next year. And next year you do the same thing. And then next year you do the same thing. And you've divorced that operational plan from your strategic plan because of a critically flawed vision statement. So if the repositioning vision is too far out and wasn't intended to be a vision statement or shouldn't have been the vision statement, then I would say, but you guys give me some feedback and tell me what you think. Establishing a revitalized core with a self-sustained economy that provides the revenue needed to revitalize the rest of the city would be a clear, better, more attainable within a generation vision statement. So again, I'm throwing out arguments there. I'm not debating. I'm not asking you to accept this, my personal critique of the nebulousness of the vision statement. And that, quite frankly, it's a big document, and it might be more clearly stated and better stated somewhere in there. And although I've read this thing a good 15 times and referred to it a million times, I've never quite plucked it out. It's never jumped out at me. But a lot of times when I'm reading it with a different focus. And when I was planning for this show, I didn't even realize this was a problem. When I was planning for the show, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to go to section 1.1 and pull out the vision statement for everyone. And it took me a long time. I had to totally rewrite and rethink what I was going to present to you guys. So while I leave you guys to contemplate these things, send me comments down below, or go to the YouTube channel, leave some comments there. You can email or find me on Facebook and send me an IM. Some other things I want to leave you guys to think about is the Gorge Access and how you can promote it. Please go visit the Gorge and take some pictures of yourself. Send us those photos. We want to use those. You've probably seen some photos popping up in the background here. But in the future, I want to see some gorgeous people in the Gorge. Who's a gorgeous person? Anyone who the camera likes better than me. You're gorgeous. So send us photos of you in the Gorge, and we'll display them. If you want, you can tell us a little story about them too. And in the future, you're going to see us immerse ourselves in the Gorge a lot more. We're going to have a lot of fun with that. Some other things that we'll be doing going forward, so showing you more of the studio, showing you its capabilities. And with that, I just want to thank you guys for watching this first episode. I hope it wasn't too heavy or too deep. And we've touched on Gorge Access. We touched on the studio. We touched on some planning concepts and discussed those foundational documents. And please join us again in the next episode, where we're definitely going to explore the good, bad, and ugly of the comprehensive plan in more depth and its relationship with the budget and zoning ordinance in a little bit more detail. Thank you. See you later.